My name is Patrick Donovan. I work at QUESCREN as the Research and Operations Manager. So we have an interesting session coming up for us. I'll introduce our first speaker, Joanne Pattison-Meek, who you've already seen, but now I'll tell you a little bit more about Joanne. An associate professor in the School of Education at Bishop's University. Her research interests include pluralist citizenship education in rural schools, innovation in the teaching practicum, and mentorship of new teachers. Her current research project, funded by the Fonds de Recherche du Québec, Société Future, FQSC, examines how teachers support their students to explore and understand the cultural realities of growing up as rural youth Quebec communities. And Joanne recently published a research brief with us at QUESCREN on practicums, looking at where students from different schools go throughout the province. And that's quite interesting because a lot of the regions are disadvantaged. Don't get as many of these student teachers who could be bringing new ideas and also be learning about what's going on in some of these regions. Here you go, I've signed up your presentation. But she's talking about something different today. So here you go, Joanne, it's all you.
Thank you. And can you take that bag so I don't fall on my?
Yes.
Thank you. And I can't do the mic and quit at the same time. I mean, that would be entertaining for you, I think, but. Anyway, so I'm a teacher educator, former high school teacher, so I'm gonna do some instructional strategies with you today, okay? So here's this long-winded title, Growing Up Rural in Quebec. I'm gonna say rural. I'm gonna make eye contact with someone in the audience, not creepy eye contact. But I'm gonna say rural, you're gonna say the first thing that comes to your mind. Okay? It's not a test, it's okay. And this is when people go. Okay, so I say rural, you say
Cac.
So Donovan, I say rural, you say small. I say rural, you say not Montreal. Not Montreal. I once had a grad student who kept referring to the regions as basically, not Montreal. She actually wrote that in the. Right? I say rural, you say
Community.
okay, we'll land there. We'll land there. Thank you so much. All right. So I wanted to do that activity because rural is often framed as some universal concept, right? That everyone knows what it means. And probably one of those most violent words I find in the English language is the. A group of people, right? Yeah. To treat them as some homogeneous entity. And just a little background about myself. Back in 2007, a long time ago, I graduated from my Bachelor of Education program at OIC at the University of Toronto. I was armed with culturally responsive pedagogy. I did my practicum in Brampton and Mississauga. And guess where I landed? School of 300 students in Acton, Ontario, or as the students called it, Action, because nothing happened there. All the kids were white, all of them. And I go, how am I supposed to do this type of work? How do I teach about diversity and difference when there doesn't seem to be in here? Yeah. So that led to my PhD and has propelled me to where I am today at Bishop, which makes a really interesting sandbox to do this work, as you can imagine, right? So my work looks more at ruralities. I try and get my students to understand there is diversity and difference in these rural contexts, although sometimes you just can't see it. And I find when we use the term the rural without thinking about the complexity of rural spaces, that these efforts to homogenize the rural risk obscuring the complexities of rural lives, ultimately dehumanizing rural peoples and their communities. In 2022, Statistics Canada defined rural land as the land that remains after the urban has been mapped.
Oh my God.
So I imagine how they define rural people. So I use generative, not quite as Heather does, okay? But I do draw a generative theory of rurality in my work. It's a social framework that views rural areas and peoples as dynamic and complex, shaped by the interplay of various factors. This is not my theory, I wish it was. But Balfour, Claudia Mitchell from McGill, if anyone knows, and Molisante. Morality is conceptualized not with a fixed definition, but is rather a process of understanding how different elements interact to create distinct rural contexts and experiences. Okay, what we experience in a rural school, say in just outside Sherbrooke, let's say in Lennoxville, is going to be vastly different than if we're up in Gaspé. There will be similarities, but they are specific. Okay, and I prefer to view rural communities as evolving spaces where inhabitants shape their own realities, cultural or otherwise, rather than simply reacting to external influences or definitions like Statistics Canada. So let's not reduce these places or peoples. Okay. So as Patrick mentioned, the research I'm going to share with you today is an FRQ funded project. I'm in the final year of the project. Unfortunately, there's so much more work to do on this. And my question asks, how do teachers in rural Quebec support students to explore rural cultures? Okay, so I went out and I spoke with a number of teachers thinking, they already do this work. They already do this work. Well, not so much because it is different. So my initial teacher interviews, I came up with 3 lines of thinking from teachers in terms of how they approach that work. So I love quotes. So these slides are full of quotes. So this first teacher I quoted says, I work in a rural school, but I don't know much about rural communities. Rural culture, ? I'd like some ideas to connect with my students and understand what it's like to grow up here. This is a teacher who grew up in an urban environment like me, got a job, so we're in a small community, and thought something's up here. And I'm kind of interested in this work. He also had his small car moved by the school hockey team from the front to the back of the school. And he's like, I don't know what's going on here. And I said, that's a sign of endearment. They like you. Don't worry, they'll do more. They'll do more. So he wanted to do this work. The second line of thinking. Our rural context is a part of our everyday. We do trips to local farms and fairs, but we don't really unpack what it means to be rural. What does that mean? It's taken for granted. We're in the river, we're in the current, but we never really take time to turn around and try and understand what that current is. Okay. So, and then the final sort of typology, or type, sorry. My students have a lot of self-esteem issues, which I think is connected to where we are. They don't see themselves in much of what we learn. And this is true. If we look at curriculum across provinces, I just finished looking at the elementary social science curriculum here in Quebec. Rural is a demographic term, right? It's population. If I look at the social science curriculum, I learned that rural basically fueled the existence of urban places in Quebec, rural labor and resources. That's how it's framed. But rural identities aren't really present there. And then something happened. Ta-da, when my research started. Oops, that's what was supposed to happen. Okay, this curriculum showed up. Right? Are we familiar with the new CCQ curriculum? I'm sure many people in the room are. Culture and Citizenship in Quebec. What's it called? If we were to translate the French version? Quebec.
Wow.
So interestingly, that's the only piece that's not translated word for word.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah. Anyway, that's another session.
Wow.
So this curriculum opened up many opportunities for my work, and to design a curriculum that we could use with teachers to get them thinking about how to explore students' cultures and identities. Isn't this beautiful? I didn't do it. This is one of my students. It's a 20-page document. It's called a learning and evaluation situation.
Oh, yeah.
I just call it a unit of study for secondary 1. So we named this unit of study Growing Up Rural in Quebec, Understanding Rural Communities and Cultures. Notice that rural is in quotation marks to suggest that rural is something that we can unpack during this unit. So I went out, found a number of schools to work with teachers and to allow this unit to unfold and to see what happened. Some links to the Quebec education program. Secondary 1. I'm going to be sharing the student work with you, so keep in mind, 12 and 13 years old. They're still babies, right? 12, 13. These are some complex things that we're asking them to think about. The competency studies cultural realities. I inserted rural in there as an identity piece. Okay, the theme identities and belonging. So the objective was for students to recognize oneself and others living in Quebec's rural communities. Okay, so CCQ, not a lot of time in schools. For many of the schools, it's only one class in a 9-day cycle, right? If you're lucky, 2. And if you're really lucky, you might get a teacher who's doing CCQ with, say, ELA or another writing course, and they can merge the 2 together. Okay. If you're familiar with the CCQ, you'll know there's over 1,000 concepts in this curriculum. Denny Jeffries, a colleague of mine from U Laval, says you need a PhD in sociology just to teach this course and to understand. So remember, 12, 13 years old, look at some of these pieces: dimensions of identity, plural identities, transformation of identity in adolescence. So we tried our best to integrate rural as best as we could with the identity piece, sense of belonging, but also rejecting rural as well, because not everybody loves living in rural. So we needed to open up spaces as well. Okay, so we open the LES. So just to give you some context too, so last year we had the project in 3 English language schools. And this year we have it in 6 French language schools and 2 English schools. So we do have the curriculum in both English and French. So we open the unit with students this way. They're in small groups. And I'll say just having them in small groups was a challenge, because a lot of times students aren't used to the dialogue that the CCQ curriculum expects of students, right? So like, what we want us to talk with each other. So we talked in small groups. We're like, and we do an unpacking of an image that looks like this. So does anyone here want to participate? What are you seeing here? I know I have the stories in the room. What are we seeing?
Well, it's a school bus.
Yeah, that's it. A school bus. Yeah, a school bus. Yeah. Anyone else? It's not yellow. It's not yellow.
I see a lunchbox.
Yeah, you kind of see a.
Over here?
Yeah.
Right?
Before guys.
So if you think about it, we chose this image because a number of students who attend rural schools, they spend a lot of time in the bus. There's about 10 years ago, there was a great sociological project about what is learned on the school bus. Some of the students in our study spend up to 2 hours one way. So 4 hours a day on a school bus, right? And so I remember one student in the classroom saying, wow, I thought it took me a long time to get to school. Imagine this, right? So students look at this and they're trying to decipher what's happening. And then we put it in relation to that. What's it like to go to school for you? So we've, they come up with some of the most interesting things, like fixated, right? Like, there's a face behind it. Who is it, right? They'll talk about that for 15 minutes. I'm like, come on, no, we can talk about bigger things. And we get them to write a caption as well, because in this unit, they will be asked to take a picture or 2 that represents their rural culture or rurality. So throughout the unit, they are continually dissecting these photos. So embedded throughout the unit, many learning activities, guided inquiries, small group discussions, the photo analyses, and we have them do gallery walks. So for example, one of the activities, we have about 15 different photos of rural, which are really random. They're around the walls of the classroom, and students are asked to consider what aspects of rural do you see in the images, if any? Do any of the images represent cultural stereotypes of rural people and rural life? If yes, why? Which of the images, if any, reflect your experiences living in rural Quebec? And explain. If you were to take a picture of your rural reality, what would it be? The cultural part has been a challenge. Okay, to ask 12, 13-year-olds about rural culture has been brand new because they haven't had an opportunity or a language to articulate it. I creep in the back of the classroom sometimes and do observations. And the teacher sort of pitched this question out. I'll never forget a student in the front of the room. And he looks at the teacher and goes, huh? Culture. And touched his hand this way and said, we don't have culture here. Because culture is sometimes construed as race or ethnocultural diversity, right? Something that is seen. Rarely are they given the opportunity to hold up the mirror, okay? And think about how they themselves are agents of culture. So a teacher, one of my teachers, she used this sort of flower, the power flower, and created an activity, you know, like what are some of the beliefs? Not that they're homogenous, but what are some beliefs? CAC came up, political beliefs, you know, for sure. We have a lot of churches, some of the rituals, you know, we have fall fairs, you know, the townships came up. So this was a nice sort of a vehicle to support students thinking about culture. Okay, are we ready to see what the students came up?
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely, that's why we're here, right? So this was the question that guided their work, and we used a photo voice methodology, because in CCQ, they're supposed to be social scientists, so we had to use a research methodology, and that was photo voice as well. Don't get me started. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, where could the case study be that I'm sharing with you today? If you know Quebec, you've likely driven through this area. So the case study, one English language high school in rural Quebec, a former mining town. The data I'm going to share with you is compiled from 2 CCQ classes. There was one teacher, Mrs. S. Okay, so we had about 47 students and their photos, and they also wrote a narrative that accompanied their photos. So it's nice to have that ELA teacher, right, getting them to write descriptions for their pictures. And nothing that I'm sharing with you is a state secret. I'm not breaching ethics because the students' work was shared in a local gallery at the end of the semester. So it was really, really nice to see their work put out there, and we've created a gallery book for them. So we know this is Thetford Mines, right?
Yeah.
Assuming. I thought it was interesting, just an aside, some of the students referred to those mine deposits as whales. Because they think of them as those humpback whales that you see coming out of the ocean. I'd love a whole project working with these kids about what they think might be the future of this community and those whales. Okay, so I'm going to share with you 4 themes that emerged. The first theme, the rural idol or ideal versus the rural dull. So this is sort of the romanticization of rural, right? Small, we all know each other, everything's grand. And it's usually compared to like the evils of urban spaces of Montreal, right? So first of all, isn't the composition just beautiful?
It is.
Right? And I'm like, you did. He's like, I took it the other night, you know, but I just think it's the talent from these students is really exceptional. So he writes, going to the outdoor skating rink with everyone in my village. It's a great experience. Something in my picture that only someone in a rural community would understand is that you know everybody and you can ask them anything without having to worry about who you're talking to. We all know each other. Sometimes not a good thing either.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. So there were some students who read this were like, not always. Okay, we've got pictures of campfires, right? Only people who grew up in a rural community understand, you know, being in your backyard, eating s'mores, spending time with family, right? That sense of space. But then we move to the rural dull, or in the literature is called rural horror for you, right? A sense of emptiness on the rural Quebec roads. The song that birds sing gives me a sense of hope through the tough times. I worked with them in the winter, so it was pretty dreary outside. But then I looked at this picture, I'm like, what am I looking at? What am I looking at? As a student writes, the little broken cabin will always stay the same, just like the town I live in.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, very, very powerful. And at the end of the unit, it was a gallery walk in the classroom for students to walk around and try and see themselves in the other photos, but also find discussion points with the other kids in the class. So diversity is something that could be construed from their photos as well. Things they had never spoken about with each other. This was a big theme, and I had to call it tapping traditions, rural work and cultural inheritance. So in this area of Quebec is sort of this, sensational place for maple syrup production. And so this certainly came up, but mostly around a rural work ethic. Okay, so I'll just read the last sentence for you because I know I'm running out of time. I took this picture because I'm very proud to show all the work we have done setting up the maple syrup lines, me and my family setting up these tubes. And it progressed. It was kind of interesting how we could see the process of maple syrup production. I love this one. I want to read the whole quote. This is my sugar shack, more precisely, the right side of it. On the picture, there is the wood room where we store all our wood that we cut every year. Honestly, sometimes it feels overwhelming, as if it will never be finished, but it isn't a job I hate compared to the other farm chores. My family dedicates a lot of time into our sugar shack work, and we all have to do our share. So it's sort of that community spirit of working together. And again, it's that rural work ethic that comes through, right? And then they take us into, look at this, right? And so we had a whole class talking about this cultural inheritance, sort of this this legacy of maple syrup production in the region. And it showed up in other ways. Patrick, don't cut me off because this is just a few more slides. I love this. A student brought in a picture of her, which I didn't bring in. This is a picture of her aunt. And she put the picture side by side to show that here she is, the next generation working in the same barn that our aunt works in. Oh. Right? So I thought that was really, really powerful. Next to her tractor that has been in the family for generations. I'm telling you, you get pictures of tractors up, kids, you lose them. You lose them. They all want to say, who's that? Who's that? I saw that. What's going on with yours? I see your family selling theirs. So it's kind of interesting to hear. Right? Coming of age as well is a different theme. So there's lots of images that are connected to the first time of doing something. So transitioning from youth to semi-adulthood. Anyone know what this is looking at? Anyone who hunts in the room? This is from the top of one of these. Yeah. So what inspired me to take this picture is that it was my first time going moose hunting and shooting my life. There were a collection of dead animals, photos in the room. And by the way, gender was not an aspect in that. We had female, male students all taking part in the hunt, which I thought was interesting. I assume that would be somewhat gendered. Black bears, we had some dead black bears in our photos. And this one I thought was interesting too. I took this photo because it was the first time I was allowed to go off with my friends on a four-wheeler where I wanted to. So I wanted to have a visual memory of that day, right? So a lot of firsts, sort of, as I said, so instead of being, like the child moving on into being a provider for the family. And finally, we can't talk about this area of her lives without talking about its history. And the rural ideal comes up. This is a student headed off to get her bus in the morning. And this is a beautiful winter scene. When you live in a rural area, you get a magnificent view to take pictures of the sky. In this picture, there are two mines and a bunch of houses. I took this photo when I was walking my bus stop because I liked how the mines looked and how pretty the sunrise was. And yet if we flip that, it's not always a beautiful scene for these students who live amidst a legacy of a failed or sort of ended industry. That is how buildings are like in the past or in present day. In this picture where it was a mining project, was dropped and left empty and abandoned. It inspires and helps me understand that not all towns are perfect or meant to last. Wow. What an opportunity, I think, to move ahead with many of these students in towns where industries have failed and to ask them about rural futures. And linking back to Heather's talk this morning, I think it's important that we do that. We see huge numbers of out-migration from these communities. And I think we need to attend to that, especially in the English-speaking areas. I'm sure we all know that data. I think this is the last one. But I love this sort of again, this cultural inheritance. Photo of the mines reminds me of the time me and my cousins traveled from behind my grandpa's house and all the way until we were on a cliff. We had a view of the entire lake. I remember asking my grandpa what it was like when he worked in the mines. And not many people outside of rural Quebec have the chance to see this and connect with their grandparents. This photo makes me calm and has me think of walking through the mines. I've heard about many of the other things they get up to in those mines, but again, it's another session. I just want to also recognize that in this community, there were some students who did not identify as rural. And there was an interesting photo that was taken by a student who had arrived from West Africa and included a picture of a Christmas tree that his family went and cut down. And he said, I included this picture because how weird you cut down a living thing and put it in your house and celebrate it. So, you know, there's different contrasting stories. And the student had never shared his impressions with other classmates. So this made for interesting opportunities and reference points. This is just a picture of the students. They know I'm sharing this with you today. They get really excited to know that they're being acknowledged for this work.
Wow.
And yeah, so this year, the project, as I said, is going wide, right? We'll be in Val d'Or. I'm heading up to Gaspé next week or the week after before the snow flies, you know, Beauceville. I'm looking forward to that. So it's going to be another busy year of data collection. And we're really focused now on how the teachers and who they are and their commitment to teaching about rural culture and how they're doing that, how they're navigating that. So thank you. And I'm sorry I went to. That's too good.
OK. La prochaine présentation va être en français. Stéphanie Robert, qui vient d'utiliser Colby-Curtis à Stansted in the Borders community of Stansted. Her slideshow will be in English, mais la présentation va être en français. Stéphanie Robert est une professionnelle de l'éducation muséale, depuis toujours passionnée par la justice sociale et les droits de la personne. Elle s'emploie à jeter des ponts entre les différentes communautés du Québec, nouveaux arrivants, peuples autochtones, francophones, anglophones. Sa formation en sociologie, maîtrise obtenue en 2010, et sa créativité débordante lui permettent de concevoir et de mettre sur pied des programmes novateurs adaptés aux besoins et aux goûts de différents publics. Elle travaille au musée Colby-Curtis depuis septembre 2021.
Thank you, merci. I can do both languages because at first when we had discussed, they kind of took for granted in French, I'm francophone, but now I'm in English in my head. So maybe we can go in English and we'll see how it goes, okay? Any francophone here? No, nobody just speaks French here, okay. Because I'm very sensitive to the reality of the Anglophone minority, and that is why I'm in here. So first, whoops, here, there you go. 3 parts, cultural profile of Stansted. So it's okay, je continue en anglais. Attention and care methodology and example. So just want to introduce you briefly to the Colby-Curtis Museum. What is it? So that we know what we're talking about. You can see the lovely pictures up there. You have the couple, then I'll turn in French. C'est le couple, donc Charles Carole Colby, qui est sa femme, Harriet Anna Child. Ils ont construit cette maison-là en 1859. Ils ont vécu 3 générations, comme on peut voir ici. Charles Carole Colby est un avocat et aussi il a travaillé à rédiger la Confédération. Donc, that's why I say he's the father of the Confederation. He worked with Johnny McDonald. But we don't say it too loud because of everything you know now about Johnny McDonald. The CHS, donc la Société historique de Stansted, or Stansted Historical Society, was founded in 1929, so it's quite early. I was speaking to a French girl from France, and she was like, oh, it's very late. And I was like, no, it's very early. But their point of view was late, but for Quebec, it's quite early because it was all held by volunteers, Anglophones, who realized that if they wanted to keep their heritage, they had to do it themselves. And here we have up here, he is the descendant of the first Colby. He has the same name. It's very confusing. Charles C. Colby II. And Archer Curtis. Arthur Curtis. So these two are the ones who gathered money to open a museum, and that's why the museum is called Colby-Curtis. It's for these two men. Down there, you see Lady Danting. She's a benefactor, and maybe later we can talk about her. She has a great role in the CHS, and she's a great lady. But I'll go forward to the point we're here for. I hope it's okay if I go from French and English like that. Yeah, thank you, merci. Right here, you can see the creation, not the creation, was a meeting of the CHS in the 40s. And I like this picture because I like to see how the ladies are super well dressed and the men, it's very chic. So it was, if I may say, it was the elite, okay? The elite were taking care of the heritage. Cultural profile of Stansted now. So, for those who don't know, we are located on the border with Vermont, Derby Line, Vermont. Before, it was 3 villages. We still refer to the downtown as Rock Island, which is really the border with the USA. BB Plain is really where the granite mines are, and Stansted Plain is where the museum is right now. There's only 2,824 inhabitants in 21. My numbers, my data are a bit old, but bear in mind, it's still the same, okay? Just a little bit more, maybe. I mean, more population, but not that much. Socioeconomics profile, as you see, then the education is lower. I think in the rural community, I think it's something you do need, less university diplomas. So you can see that 16% of Stansted women have a university diplomas, while it's 32.5 for the province, and 11% of men have a university diploma. So it's really lower than the provincial, la moyenne provinciale. What shocked me when I did this is like 53.5% do not speak French at home, but more than half. But 24.2 do not understand French at all. And for the province, it's 5.6. So as you can see, it is really an Anglophone community.
Right.
Or else other languages, because do not speak French doesn't say what they speak at home, but I can tell you, as we spoke, the diversity in the rural is not that much there. And also for the money, social assistance is very high. And the income is very low. As you can see, it's lower than la moyenne, la médiane provinciale. So I took the médiane, le salaire médian. If you have any questions, you can raise your hand also. Huh? I'm very quick. I'm so motivated by Joanne's presentation, it was so great. So Stansted Graduates is the name of the program, the educational program that the Colby-Curtis gave itself. So that's the name. In Stansted, there are 2 elementary schools. One Francophone, one Anglophone. Francophone is down there and Anglophone is up there. But these are archives pictures, because we have so many pictures in our archives. There's CPE and Le Tandem. Do you know about social pediatric clinic, pédiatrie sociale? So I was a bit shocked when I saw that in Stansted, because last time I had seen that was in Hochelaga and, you know, hard neighborhood in Montreal, but it's also very necessary in these areas. And one grassroots organization called Phelps Helps that helped really much, and Yolanda is here and she knows about that area. And Phelps Helps is a great organization. I'll talk to you about that after if you have to. But the methodology is about my work. I'm like you, Patrick presented me, I'm a sociologist, but I work in museums since 20 years almost now, doing like médiation culturelle. You say cultural mediation? Yeah, cultural mediation. And my methodology when I meet the students is based on care and attention, mostly for these young kids. So when I arrived at the museum, so the school activities were uneven. So there was not a regular offer, and there was a real disconnect between the museum and the community. As you may understand by the historics, the museum is set in a very rich house, and the community is very poor. And we had to face that for them, it was not theirs, it was others. They were poor and the museum was for rich. And one anecdote that was very impressive is we put out on a mis des banderoles sur le long du musée to say it's a museum because it's a big gray house. It was not easy to see it was a museum. So one of the first things my director did in 2020 during the pandemics was to put out big banners saying museum. And then when he did that, that's something happening, you know, in the village, so everybody looks at, and a man came in and say, oh, that's what you are. I thought you were a funeral home for rich people, wealthy. So I will always remember that. I thought we were a funeral home for wealthy people. We're a museum. So I had to go out and convince people that we were not a funeral home for wealthy people. So what you see here is the teachers from the Francophone school. Because again, I saw the cleavage, can we say that, between French and English. And the Francophone teachers do not live, most of them, some of them, but most of them do not live in Stansted. They live in Magog and they drive. It's like 30 minutes drive. It's not that bad, but they are not from there and they don't know intimately Stansted. And I realized that they had never been to the Haskell Opera House, which is the famous library on the border. You may have heard now because of the president on the south. So I brought them there. Say, this is one of the resources you guys have. You know, they didn't know. It was right there. And this is, we reorganized a room to receive children because we're in a Victorian house. I told my boss, well, if you want me to have classes, I need a room where there's no china, nothing from the collection to do activities with them. So that was my mandate, because they went and got money, and it's called Stansted Graduates, because the level of diplomation in Stansted is lower than the province moyenne. We can compare it to the native reserves as low as that, very low. So we want to help school perseverance. And we think by cultural programming, by bringing them into the museum, opening their horizon, we hope it will help them stay in school. So right now, the GREM, le groupe de recherche en éducation muséale de l'UQAM, is collecting data to see if that is true. Of course, it's a long-term process. At the beginning, so I won't go too much in the details, but at the beginning I was like, okay, I have to do one program for each year and it has to change, and oh my God, it was a bit overwhelming. So the first result, I was very complicated. I realized that the kids, because I was used to working in museums in Montreal and also in Valcourt, but we had people like from Sherbrooke, and so I was used to museums from cities. And I noticed that the level, when I arrived there, the level of the students were a lot lower than, you know, what you used to for a fourth grader, for instance. Also, in the Francophone school, most kids do speak English at home. Like 50% of the children in the Francophone school speak English at home, and some of them cannot rely on their parents for their French homework because they don't know. So that's why the FALSELPS organization, that's why it comes to help the kids with their French work, for instance. And so you come into a class, not only the level is lower than you expect, but also some kids barely understand French. But you have to speak French to them because you're in a French school and they will tell you, speak French. So, because I have a tendency to switch from languages, and the teacher told me not to do that. So what the solution I did was to rely on a temporary exhibition so that the theme would change every year. Because quickly people think, oh, I've been there to the museum 10 years ago. It's okay, I've been there. Like, oh, 10 years ago, it changed, you know, but people think I went once, I'll have to go again. So by relying on a temporary exhibition, changing every year, that helps. Also, my program, I always have between 4 and 6 meetings. And the first meeting, I go in their classroom, I present myself, I present what is a museum, what we're gonna do, the project. And at the end, it's always the same format, the first and the end. And at the end, they have an exhibition of their work that they invite their parents. Because my goal is to get people from the community in the museum. Also, the other key is that students are active. You cannot have the students just listening like you are doing right now. They won't listen. So that's why I always give them stuff to do, things to realize, like we come in the museum and I give them like activities or go find this, or they really have to stay active. Focus on skill other than writing and reading also, because sometimes, most of the time in museums, you will find like a little booklet and write down your impression about this, whatever. But then it was very hard because some kids, like I said, at 5th level elementary school, did not have the level of French to do the activity. So my activity had obstacles that were not related to the activity, but to the language, you understand? So by going over the language barrier, it helped them in get impliqué, that s'engager, engage in the activity. Dialogue-based approach, it's always through dialogue with the students, always. Example, so that's my favorite part. The first year, one of the first year I decided, before I decided to go with the temporary exhibition, so we had like, my mandate was like, oh, you got to get students interested to their heritage, Stansted heritage. But then what you say, Joanne, is so relevant, because what is heritage? What is the identity? I had to get them interested in their own identity, but most of them were kind of ashamed of being from Stansted, or on the opposite, they were like, well, I'm not from the city, you know. And in parentheses, there was a volunteer person that worked at Phelps House that told me that, like you, I love quotes. And she was like, she was working, she's an Anglophone, and she's working with a kid who's writing a text in English. And he's like writing his text. And then she says, oh, maybe you could use synonyms or change your word because you're repeating, you know, look, the same word is there and there and there, you know, to expand vocabulary. And the answer of the kid is, nope, that's the way I talk. I don't want to talk like the city folks. So you see, there's kind of an identity of not being educated is the identity that we wanted. You see what I mean? Like something educated, somebody educated is foreign, is different, it's from the city, it's not us. So that was very, ça me parlait beaucoup, ça. For me, it was very, interesting. And the mistake I made is to talk about genealogy, because I was like, okay, how to get children interested to heritage and history? Well, let's talk about their grandparents and great-great-great-grandparents. But the teacher did not sign up. And I was like, what am I doing wrong, you know? And it's just 6 months after, finally, a teacher told me that it's too sensitive. And there are many children that are foster care, la DPJ. And some of them have family quarrel, the drama. So it was too sensitive of a subject. They did not want to participate. But you see, me as an outsider, how, again, I was shocked to learn that. Success is when, I said it, action. So Cut Flowers was an exhibition about, imagine, it was about Victorian era women and their interest on garden flowers. And so how do you get kids to get interested? Well, we did, now I cannot even think in English, in French, un herbarium, that's an herbarium, un herbier. So we went outside and we took plants even in the winter and they researched it, they pasted it, and then we had the exhibition. Each time they have the exhibition, you see here, there's plates, that's the kids. They organize themselves, their event, their vernissage. So they organize the food, they welcome parents. And at first, the teacher were like, what? You want children to be in charge of, manipulating food? Yes. Yes, so give them, trust them, give them chance to prove themselves. And they were very, very, very proud of receiving their parents in the museum. That gave a big sense of belonging. When I said, who wants to give a visit of the museum? They all want. So for me, they appropriate. Ils se sont appropriés vraiment le musée. And I had a grandpa who was like come in and he had his boots and he really smelled like cows. And he's like, oh, it's been 20 years I'm passing in front of your museum and I never stepped in, I never came in. And I was like, yay, you're welcome. I was so proud. And the other time, the first years, I literally took the hand of a mother and I brought her in because she was afraid to go in. And they were saying, some parents were like, oh, I'm not dressed properly or nice enough. Like, no, you don't have to be whatever else, you come in as you are. For me, it was very important to do that. The caregiver exhibition, that was a bit easier because it was about women work in the 20th century, and mostly it was the exhibition of the women institutes. Thank you. Women institutes. So we talked about that, and they met elders, they cooked food, they learned how to weave. And that was great. The sewing, the couture, l'atelier de couture, the kids were very happy, like, oh, now I know how to sew. So the practical things, they really appreciate. One thing that I want to mention that's not on the slides is the distrust that I noticed of the Stansted community, and I guess it's probably the same in any Anglophone rural community, is the lack of trust of the institutes in general. They don't trust institute, they don't trust in organization. So it's really about the person. Like me, I'm the girl from the museum. And now I've been there for 4 years. Now they're starting to know me. I go in the village, I don't live in Stansted, but I go in the grocery in Stansted and I go meet the people. And then slowly the trust is building. But it's really about showing how you're not there to tell them what they're doing wrong, but we're there to work together. And that's my approach, to work together. And lastly, here what I see you, I hear you, let's take action together. Because the children, really, they need attention. It's crazy. It's like today with our cell phones and everything, I think parents are not giving enough attention to their kids. And they are overstimulated and they really appreciate when you take the time, look at them in the eyes and really listen to what they have to say. So that's my take. And I just would like to thank our donors. And here is my info if you need. Thank you.
I'll invite you guys to come up here. So we have
Yes. We're all.
Well, we have up to 22 minutes for questions.
Excellent.
Any questions? Yep.
First, you mentioned a garden. Was that
Yeah.
at the museum?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, the picture you've seen was at the school, actually. So we went outside because their school, the Anglophone school, I was Anglophone school, the Sunnyside, yes. Sunnyside, they have now a garden and they have a super nice area. So we went there, but for the Francophone school, we went to the Colby-Curtis garden.
Wait, you're back.
Question?
Question?
Yes, question?
Yes?
Thank you very much. Question for Joanne. Thank you very much. Very engaging, thoughtful, presentation. As you were presenting, I had a question in mind because your idea and notions of rurality in the context of Quebec citizenship and history is quite interesting because rurality is not just any kind of exotic concept in Quebec history. Actually, rurality is a fundamental principle and theme of French Canadian nationalism. Connected to the clerical nationalist idea of agriculture, rural way of life, and the Catholic faith. All of this were very closely connected. And we know this ideology started to change in the 1950s and 60s with the Quiet Revolution. So I wonder to what extent, if your study had been done with their parents or grandparents, you would have ended up with different stories. And this leads me to the question. The kids you interviewed are kids of the Bill 101, les enfants de la loi 101. They were born, they don't have any memory and recall of a world before the Quiet Revolution, unless they were taught about it at home or in school. So did you find any story or understanding of rurality that connected to the history of Quebec? Or even, in an English-speaking context, rurality was also a key principle of defining Canada at the turn of the 20th century. It was very much connected to this notion of the true north, strong and free. Even in English Canada, we still hear something about it, like players, Wayne Gretzky will say that you learn to skate on a frozen pond in the back country, and these things, still are there in English Canada. But in Quebec, I think it's very much connected to a sense of a principle of a good way of life. That's how you're a good French Canadian. So did you find any connection to that in the story or the kids, or is it something that is now completely removed from their consciousness?
Yeah, thanks, Stefan. I thought you were gonna ask some deep question about historical consciousness, so I'm glad you did that. So there are multiple stories emerging, right, through this project, and I'm in various schools now. I'm 5 years in Quebec now, and I'm learning that an English-speaking school doesn't necessarily mean that you have Anglophone students in that school, right? In fact, the case I shared with you in Thetford, 98% of those students are Francophone, who speak French at home, and some of them didn't even want to be in that school. They wanted to be with their friends over at Black Lake, And another quote, "Oh, Anglophone students," when I asked, "I think Brandon's down the hall. I think he's an Anglo," right? So language has surfaced in different ways. Now, let's say if I'm in the Eastern Township School Board, say around Galt Regional High School, a number of students are bused from Stansted. And some of their pictures were of English signs only from Stansted. And they said, "This is my rural reality." Just a sign in English language only. Linking it back to the family connections, right? We encourage these students to take this assignment home. We have a letter that accompanies the students home, so the parents are aware. It was actually more out of the fact that we were asking students to take pictures with their cell phones, which you can't do in school anymore, unless you're, a subversive teacher and you have them do it anyway. So we wanted the parents involved in some capacity to help support the transfer of photos. But I haven't had a lot of contact with the families directly, but the teachers have in the project. And they say that this has surfaced a number of stories from students coming during all those lessons that they have in the unit, talking about this is the history of how we arrived here. So for example, a student said in an interview, "I didn't understand what historic Anglophone meant. We're 200 years on the farm." I'm working with a teacher right now around Shadowgate, sorry. And he's having a very difficult time because his family is selling the family farm. you know, but he came home because he wanted to teach kids just like him, so they don't forget their heritage. So there's so many layers to this project that I couldn't account for or plan for, but what you said, something very interesting too, is that a lot of these students don't have an awareness of Bill 101. Working at Bishop's University, many of my student teachers have no awareness of Bill 101. Then when they walk into Galt Regional High School and they say, it's so empty in there. I say, yeah, it was built for 3,000 students. And prior to 1977, it was full. And now they barely have 900. It's like a ghost town in there, right? So this is something that, you know, Stéphanie, it's not in the curriculum per se, you know, that the Anglophone perspective, let's just say, you know, and the histories of these communities, but it doesn't mean that they can't be. So the CCQ, and I don't want to put too much hope in a curriculum that sometimes is taught, isn't taught once every 9 days, but there are opportunities to make links through this curriculum, and that's one thing that was important to us. So thank you for questions. Do you want to add anything?
I'm surprised that what you say about it from my English school, because it's like the opposite of the Francophone school in Stansted, where there's lots of, where's the Francophone? You know, they're all Anglophones. And at the museum, I have guides that I hire that they are struggling to finish their high school, secondary school, because of the French class. They just can't finish French. They're struggling. And I understand that's why a lot of parents send their children, Anglophone parents, send their children to the Francophone school, because they know how hard French language is, and they need that in order to get their diplomas. So for me, I really see it as a fracture, really a fracture. And when you go to Sunnyside Elementary School, it's a bit like you say, same thing, built for I don't know how many students, there's half of it, empty classes. So it's, like you said, it's something about a ghost town. And historical Anglophone, we talk about that too, like our president, I don't know if you know Matthew Farfan, he was like, I'm an historical Anglophone, you know, and I'm like, oh my God, you know, I understand this point of view. I understand how La Loi 101 is, like you say, we don't realize, but yes, La Loi 101 really did its work. And now with the Bill 96, is they like pushing further. And, you know, I'm a Francophone, but I travel, I speak Spanish also and Portuguese. And for me, I think it's a bit unfair. I will say it, it's a bit unfair. And I see the Anglophones, they're afraid sometimes to speak English, because they all been said, au Québec, ici, parle français. A lot of intolerance. And I'm not proud of that at all, of that intolerance.
Part of the final phase of the project is, now that we have the project situated in English language schools and French language schools, is that at the end of this year, we're going to do a photo swap across the schools. The goal being that regardless of language, students have things in common, but they also face similar challenges. And in the rural areas, I think it's important for them to come together. Different issues, certainly, when it comes to the languages in rural areas, but that is a hope for this final layer of the project.
Question. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Yolanda. I work with Literacy in Action. My question is for Joanne, and thank you for acknowledging the plurality of rural existence. I work in the Eastern Townships across 7 MRCs, and we get to witness that diversity and seeing these different pockets of English-speaking identity. But I don't think people always get to see that because they're sort of in their communities. You kind of touched on it just a little bit about the future, because a lot of it sort of like these archival images and what their present day reality is. So I'm wondering if there's discussion in these little groups of 13-year-olds about what is the future of that identity and what rurality means to them, looking forward, not just in the past where we kind of get stuck sometimes as Anglos. So
Yeah, I think that what I'm finding in these schools is that the dominant voices
are those who are very rooted in rural. They're very loud and proud. But I also see students who, I portrayed a very rural ideal presentation today, and I have to acknowledge that. And the students who are not happy tend to be somewhat reserved. Keeping in mind as well, I'm working in a context where this is a project that they're going to be evaluated on. So there's some concern around if I voice sort of like I'm anti-ideal, that, I do not feel safe in this town. At 12 or 13, they're still kind of navigating, right? Where is my safe space? Or as I argue, a safe enough space for me. So for me, the Rural Futures Project, that's coming up, right? So that's where I hope to go from here. It's not a perfect answer to your question, but it can't stop here to our contemporary selves, right? So we have to create something for them to continue the conversations. It may not be curriculum oriented. It might be something with some nonprofit groups or whatever, but I'm not aware, unless anyone in the room can help me out, of an outlet to support youth to have these conversations in rural communities. I'm sure they exist somewhere, but I think they're important to tap into. But the context is so specific to Quebec, it's not like we can look to Manitoba, what happened there, or Saskatchewan. It's very, very specific to Quebec. So thanks.
Dave, and then we have John.
Hi, I'm David Law from the Quebec English School Association. So we represent the non-English sports and the Centre des Services Scolaires du Canada on special status. Both of you showed exemplary teaching styles on how you do the practices as far as bringing in experiential learning and also bringing in engagement with the polos that they themselves have versus teaching to as learning from. What I'm wondering is, we know very well that the outlying areas, rural areas, per se, quotations, the results are lower, as is the case, like you mentioned, Joanne, in Indigenous communities. We often learn more from the cities than finding out and learning from the rural. How is evaluation different than what we expect in the cities and what exists in the rural areas? So I'm thinking about the LES as you did.
So in terms of the evaluation, can you sort of stretch what you mean by that? Like, in terms of our expectations?
Expectation, and they see themselves as failures.
Yeah.
Only the rich people go into the museum. Right?
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
the city.
Do you want to speak to it? Much more on this.
Yes. Well, I'm not sure, I'm not sure I grasp everything, because it's like you said, it's like being proud of not being educated.
Maybe what
Maybe.
we need to change it on what we see as success.
Oh, yeah, like role models, maybe.
What's out there?
Well,
Percentage. Oh, sorry. You wanna go because
well,
I'm
I
not.
just have a little comment. I think
Go ahead.
something that needs some serious attention is how our teachers regard the communities that they're working in.
Yeah.
It's not always folks who are local to the school that they're working in, and that can be a problem. I gave a similar presentation at the LCEQ in February, and there was an individual in the room who said, looked at this and dismissed it. And he said, I just don't think my students have the capacity to do this, especially the written narrative.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, there's someone who's entering a classroom with a deficit lens of these students and the community. And I myself, I was raised as a teacher in such a community. And I'll tell you, it's, as you said, trust is so important. And when you come into kids, they'll see you, and they won't trust you, So I think that working, I'm so privileged to work at School of Education at Bishop's. And so Patrick mentioned a project I did tracking where student teachers are from. And we serve the rural schools. We send our student teachers into those schools. So we work very hard. I can only speak for myself, really, trying to build our teachers up so that they can build their students up in these communities. And it's difficult to do that because sometimes they come back with these like, they just weren't engaged, their reading levels are low. Well, what else can you do? Have them take pictures, have them talk about, there are different ways to evaluate students as well. But don't get me started, you're talking to a teacher, so.
That's it, that's exactly, that's it. That's what I'm doing also, and you're so right. Some teachers, they're like, oh no, my student won't never be able to do that. I'm like, trust me, we'll find out. And they are more able than you think. But yes, it has to go through different ways, maybe different manners. And it's true, like the director of the Francophone school, she's new. And when she arrived there, some other colleagues from other places said, oh my God, you're going to Stansted. It's like the worst place on earth, whatever. You're going to have the worst school. So there's a lot about that of already starting with a stereotype and saying, oh no, there's nothing we can do here. And all the teachers all say, oh, my class is very agitated. They always say that, agitated. Oh yeah, so bring them. That's a better way, because I'm not a teacher, but I'm a museum educator. So for me, I reach all my goals for me, and they give me pearls at the end, the vernissage. I always ask them to talk to their parents. All the parents are there, and then I present, the teacher present the experience. And I always say, okay, you want to say, how did you feel about the program? What did you do? And it's, wow, unbelievable. They retain the information, the concept. So they are brilliant. It's just like all these layers, like you say, we have to go through to go get that or give that knowledge, hook the knowledge to something.
Hi, John McMahon from the Secretariat Haute Édition avec Québécois d'Expression.
Ah oui.
Wonderful presentations. One of the concerns that we hear in government, particularly in terms of English-speaking communities, is the exodus of Anglophone youth from the regions, from rural areas. Based on, your projects, your findings, what would be your recommendations to government in terms of perhaps utilizing your findings, utilizing the results of these kinds of projects in order to address that issue of the exodus of Anglophone youth from the regions?
Can I go first?
Yeah, go please.
Okay, so just relating back to what I was saying around curriculum. So I'd be speaking to the Ministry of Education, is that we need more explicit opportunities embedded in curriculum that highlights the value of rural communities. It's not there currently. As I said, it tends to be presented as a deficit. Show me a curriculum that says, with a talking point or a teaching point, why might someone from an urban area move to a rural community? It's always the opposite. Explain the process of urbanization. So let's talk about opportunities officially embedded in schools on this topic, right? So it's just one suggestion, since you're asking. So easy to implement too, I'm sure.
I totally agree.
No.
I totally agree. When the kids don't see themselves, like you say, they don't reflect themselves, they arrête. But also the exodus, I see it. Instead, I see it because you have all the elders that have more money and their children are all away. I would say it's work. Find a place of work where they can work in English.
So we have 2 more minutes and we have 2 questions. So
Let's go.
10 seconds for a question, 30
2
seconds.
seconds
for an
answer. Let's go.
Hopefully this will be quick. My name is Brittany Chabot. I work for the English Community Organization in Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean. I noticed that's not in part of the regions that you're going to be visiting, but is this type of project, like for example, if the school's not covering this as part of their curriculum because they're teaching another capacity, is this type of project something that you'd be willing to hand over to community orgs to do as workshop building stuff within the schools? Or is that training that can be offered through this project? Because I think it would be really pertinent and useful in our particular region, so.
Yeah, for sure. I'm hoping that I can work with Learn. And this might be an LES that might be uploaded as part of their resources. Absolutely, it's been part of the research project so far, and we've just been sort of fine tuning many things. So, and you can also connect with me as well. And I'm certainly willing to share that beautiful LES document that my students created. So yes, it will be absolutely available.
Excellent, thank you.
Charles Taker, from the Office of the Commissioner of the Official Languages. Talking about rurality, I have a different experience. I come from an island in the middle of Gulf St. Lawrence, so it's beyond rural, it's isolated. And throughout my work, I've visited all of the English-speaking communities across Quebec in every administrative region. And one of the things that I noticed, even from my own experience growing up in an isolated community, is there was often a sense of low self-esteem with regard to their identity, or especially in comparison to the urban environments. People were more articulate, people had culture, whereas we didn't have culture, we just were.
Yeah.
And what, you know, we didn't go to the museums, we didn't know about opera, we didn't know about art and those things, and we undervalued what we did have.
Yeah.
But and I'm gonna end on a positive note, I'm noticing as I continue to visit these communities, there's a newfound sense of affirmation. People are becoming more self-aware and proud of their culture, which is different maybe from the urban environment. What they know is different. And I think that newfound sense of affirmation is what I think is very strong. And so I hope you're going to visit some of the isolated communities as well, especially the Magdalen Islands or the Lower North Shore, where it's beyond rural,
Oh, yeah.
Remote.
Oh, yeah.
Remote.
remote.
Yeah.
All these labels. Thank you,
Yeah.
Statistics
Yes.
Canada, for these.
Thank you, Charles, for ending on that hopeful note. So it is 12:15, lunchtime. So lunchroom is across the corridor in one of these doors. I think they all lead to a room. So thank you very much
Thank
for our
you.
presenter.